There is a distinct difference between a man who built an empire and a man who was simply handed the keys to one. A man who built it understands every brick, every nail, every drop of sweat that went into the foundation. But a man who was handed the keys, he begins to believe he created the sky itself. My name is Chloe Crawford, and for 5 years I sat quietly in the shadows of high society while my husband, Xavier Lawson, convinced the world he was a self-made technological genius. It was a crisp Thursday evening in early November. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was glowing under massive crystal chandeliers. 500 of the city's most elite investors, venture capitalists, and media moguls were gathered for the annual Metropolitan Tech Gala. Champagne glasses clinked, silk gowns rustled, and quiet deals were being sealed in every corner of the room. I stood near a towering marble pillar, wearing a classic, simple navy silk dress. I didn't wear loud diamonds or flash expensive designer logos. I didn't need to. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, watching Xavier from across the room. He looked magnetic. Tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, low, crisp fade, standing at the center of a circle of eager journalists. He was holding court, laughing loudly as he gestured toward a giant digital display showcasing his company's newest software platform, Lawson Dynamics. The vision was simple, Xavier's deep voice echoed through a nearby microphone as a reporter held out a recorder. When you have the courage to take massive risks, the market rewards you. Lawson Dynamics isn't just a company, it's my life's work. I smiled faintly into my glass. His life's work. He forgot to mention that 5 years ago, when he was living out of a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with maxed out credit cards, I was the one who rewrote his entire technical framework. He forgot to mention that while he slept, I spent 16-hour nights fixing the catastrophic coding errors that nearly destroyed his initial prototype. And, most importantly, he forgot who actually paid for the building he worked in. A soft rustle of expensive silk approached my right side. A woman stepped up beside me, holding a glass of vintage champagne. It was Bianca Sinclair. Bianca was the 26-year-old daughter of Sinclair Global Media, a high society heiress known for her flawless designer wardrobe, sharp tongue, and complete lack of empathy for anyone below her social station. She was wearing an emerald green halter gown that practically screamed wealth and ownership. She glanced at my simple dress, letting out a soft, pitying sigh. "It must be exhausting, Chloe," said Bianca, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I turned my head slightly, looking at her. "What must be exhausting, Bianca?" "Trying to fit into a world you clearly don't belong in," she replied smoothly, taking a deliberate sip of her champagne. "Look around this room. These are titans of industry, visionaries. Xavier is moving into a realm of global power now. A man at his level needs a partner who enhances his image, not an anchor holding him back." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scowl. I simply adjusted my watch and stared into her eyes. "An anchor," I repeated softly. "You're a sweet girl, Chloe," Bianca murmured, leaning in a fraction closer. "A quiet, dutiful housewife, but let's be honest, you were a temporary placeholder while Xavier built his foundation. You don't match the decor of the penthouse anymore." Before I could answer, Xavier walked over to us. His face was flushed with wine and victory. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask if I needed a drink. He immediately placed a firm, possessive hand on Bianca's lower back, pulling her toward his side. A subtle victory smile spread across Bianca's lips. "Xavier," I said quietly, keeping my tone perfectly even, "the keynotes are about to start. Are we sitting at table 4? Xavier stopped. He finally turned his eyes toward me, but there was no warmth in them, no affection, only a cold, detached impatience. He reached into his inner tuxedo jacket and pulled out a long, crisp white envelope. He didn't hand it to me gently. He slid it across the tall marble cocktail table between us. It slid across the polished surface, stopping right beside my water glass. "What is this, Xavier?" I asked. "Your exit package, Chloe," Xavier said flatly. His voice didn't tremble. He spoke as if he were delivering a routine termination letter to a middle-level manager. The surrounding chatter near our pillar died down. A few prominent investors standing nearby turned their heads, sensing the sudden, sharp shift in energy. I looked down at the white envelope. Printed across the top corner in bold black ink were the words "Lawford and Associates, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." Divorce papers, served in the middle of a 500-person gala. "You're serving me divorce papers at an industry event?" I asked, looking up into his eyes. "I didn't want to drag this out in private meetings where you'd get emotional," Xavier said smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks. "Lawson Dynamics is going public next month. The board needs total clarity on my personal estate. I can't have a long, messy legal battle looming over our valuation." "I spent 5 years building this life with you, Xavier," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my chest burned with a quiet, deep betrayal. "I sacrificed my own career so you could build Lawson Dynamics." Xavier let out a short, condescending laugh. "You didn't sacrifice anything, Chloe," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You lived in a $10 million penthouse. You drove luxury cars. You enjoyed the fruits of my genius. But let's be real, you don't know the first thing about corporate strategy or high-level finance." Bianca chuckled softly beside him, resting her hand on his forearm. "The settlement in that envelope is generous," Xavier said, pointing a finger at the document. "A lump sum of $500,000, the suburban house in New Jersey, and a modest monthly allowance for 2 years. In exchange, you sign the non-disclosure agreement and waive all future claims to Lawson Dynamics." $500,000. For a company currently valued at $600 million. $500,000, I asked softly. "That's less than 1% of what the firm earned last quarter alone." "You didn't earn a single share of this company, Chloe," Xavier snapped, his jaw tightening with arrogant authority. "I built this empire with my own hands. Every line of code, every investor meeting, every dollar raised was because of my talent. You were just along for the ride." He reached down, picked up a pen from the table, and tapped it against the white envelope. "Sign the waiver by Monday morning, Chloe. If you try to fight me in court, my legal team will lock you in litigation until you're completely broke. Don't ruin your own life trying to claim something you didn't create." He turned back to Bianca, offering her his arm. "Come on, Bianca," Xavier said, his voice instantly softening as he looked at her. "Our table is in the VIP section." Without another word, Xavier walked away down the carpeted steps, Bianca clinging to his arm, leaving me alone by the marble pillar. Several nearby executives were staring at me, some with pity, others with subtle amusement. I stood there for a long moment in the warm glow of the chandeliers. I looked down at the white envelope. Then I reached into my small leather clutch, pulled out my encrypted phone, and swiped the screen. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. The line rang twice before a deep, dignified voice answered. "Sovereign Crest Capital? How may I direct your call?" "It's Chloe," I said quietly. There was an immediate, sharp pause on the other end. "Miss Crawford," the voice replied, his tone instantly shifting from routine receptionist to absolute highest reverence. "We didn't expect to hear you directly. Is everything all right?" I looked across the glittering ballroom at Xavier, who was currently clinking champagne glasses with the CEO of a rival firm, convinced he was king of the world. "Xavier just served me divorce papers," I said, my voice completely dry of tears, cold and razor-sharp. "He wants to buy me out for $500,000. A quiet, dangerous laugh echoed from my phone. "Does Mr. Lawson realize who actually owns the 80% voting share in Sovereign Crest Capital?" "No," I replied softly. A quiet, deadly smile spread across my lips. He still thinks his anonymous angel investor is a 90-year-old billionaire in Geneva. What are your orders, Miss Crawford? I took a slow, steady breath, holding the divorce papers in my right hand. Let him prepare the public stock offering, I whispered into the receiver. Let him invite the press, the board, and the Sinclairs to the launch party next month, and make sure my seat at the head of the table is reserved. Consider it done, CEO Crawford. I hung up the phone, slid the divorce papers into my clutch, and walked out of the ballroom into the cool night air. Xavier thought he was discarding a useless wife. He had no idea he had just declared war on his boss.
People always ask how a person can stay silent while someone else takes credit for their hard work. The answer is simple. When you build the engine, you don't care who waves the flag at the finish line until the driver forgets who gave him the car. The morning after the gala, the November sun rose cold and crisp over the city. My 10,000-square-foot penthouse was completely quiet. Xavier hadn't come home last night. He didn't need to. I already knew he was staying at Bianca's luxury estate in the hills, celebrating his freedom and telling his friends how smoothly he had handled his divorce problem. I sat at the dark marble island in my kitchen, wearing a comfortable cashmere sweater, a steaming mug of black coffee between my hands. On the counter beside me lay a pristine silver laptop and a black leather notebook, the exact same notebook where 5 years ago I had sketched out the original architecture for Lawson Dynamics. My mind drifted back to those early days. 5 years ago, Xavier was just a brilliant presenter with big dreams and zero operational discipline. He had charisma, he had energy, but his code was a chaotic disaster. When his first 2 angel investors pulled out and left him with $300,000 in debt, he broke down, crying on our living room floor. He had held my hands, tears streaming down his face, and said, "Chloe, if I can't raise $1 million by next month, the creditors will liquidate everything. I'm finished." I loved him then, truly, deeply loved him. I didn't want to see the man I cared about crushed under the weight of failure, so I made a quiet decision that changed the trajectory of our lives forever. What Xavier never knew was that my late grandfather hadn't just left me a modest family trust. He had left me an offshore investment firm called Sovereign Crest Capital, a silent, ultra-exclusive holding firm managed by Arthur Vance, my grandfather's most brilliant financial strategist. I could have simply given Xavier $1 million directly, but I knew his pride. I knew that if he knew the money came from his wife, it would erode his confidence. So I called Arthur Vance. I instructed Sovereign Crest Capital to anonymously invest $2 million into Xavier's struggling startup. In exchange, Sovereign Crest retained an 80% equity stake and full voting rights, while Xavier was granted 20% and the title of CEO. To keep the secret airtight, Arthur created a fictional persona for the lead investor, Mr. Sterling, an eccentric 90-year-old Swiss billionaire who hated publicity, never attended board meetings, and communicated exclusively through legal proxies. For 5 years, Xavier bowed to Mr. Sterling. Whenever the company needed emergency capital, Mr. Sterling approved the wire transfers. Whenever Xavier wanted to launch a new product, he submitted the proposal to Arthur Vance for Mr. Sterling's final blessing. Xavier thought he was dealing with an elusive financial titan in Geneva. He never realized Mr. Sterling was sitting right across from him at the dinner table, passing him the salt and asking how his day was. A soft knock on my penthouse door pulled me out of my memories. I stood up, walked across the polished hardwood floor, and opened the door. Standing in the hallway was Arthur Vance himself. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. "Good morning, Miss Crawford," Arthur said softly as he stepped inside as I closed the door behind me. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Arthur," I said, guiding him toward the living room. Arthur set his briefcase on the glass coffee table and popped the silver latches open. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and laid them side by side. "I've reviewed the dissolution papers Mr. Lawson's attorneys served you last night," Arthur said, his tone turning sharp and professional. "It is frankly insulting. $500,000 and a modest house for a 5-year marriage during which his net worth grew by hundreds of millions. Xavier believes he created every dollar of that valuation," I said, sitting opposite him. "He believes Sovereign Crest is just a passive checkbook that will blindly back whatever he does." "That is where his arrogance becomes his downfall," Arthur replied, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his jacket. "Mr. Lawson called me 3 hours ago." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "He was practically singing over the phone," Arthur said with a dry, bitter smile. "He informed me that he is preparing to take Lawson Dynamics public next month with a market valuation of $800 million. He requested an emergency board meeting to approve the public offering prospectus." "Did he mention the divorce?" I asked. "He bragged about it," Arthur said, shaking his head in disbelief. "He told me he had cleared the legal deadweight from his personal life to ensure a clean prospectus for investors. He even asked if Mr. Sterling would attend the launch party to meet his new fiancée, Bianca Sinclair." I let out a slow, quiet breath. The sheer entitlement of it was almost poetic. "And what did you tell him, Arthur?" I asked. "He told me that Mr. Sterling was delighted with the news," Arthur said smoothly. "I assured him that Sovereign Crest Capital would authorize the public offering paperwork, provided the signing takes place publicly at his official launch party, in front of his lead underwriters and the press." I looked down at the legal documents on the table. "Has he submitted the final equity structure for the public offering?" I asked. "Yes," Arthur said, sliding a specific document toward me. "In his proposal, Xavier assumes Sovereign Crest will convert its 80% voting shares into non-voting common stock during the IPO, leaving him with total operational control of the company." I picked up a pen from the table, turning it slowly between my fingers. "He really thinks he can strip my holding firm of its power without Mr. Sterling raising a finger," I murmured. "He is blinded by Bianca Sinclair's media machine and his own ego, Chloe," Arthur said gently. "He thinks he's stepping into the big leagues. He has no idea he's walking onto a stage you built." I stood up, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking out over the sprawling city skyline below. "Arthur," I said softly, my voice cold, steady, and sharp as a diamond. "Yes, Miss Crawford?" "Instruct our legal team to draft the response to his divorce agreement. Tell them to agree to every single term." Arthur paused, his pen hovering in midair. "You're agreeing to the $500,000 settlement?" "I'm agreeing to waive all personal claims to his 20% share of Lawson Dynamics," I said, turning to face him with a slow, deadly smile. "And Sovereign Crest's 80% controlling stake?" I asked. "Sovereign Crest will execute its full contractual right of executive replacement at the launch party. When Xavier stands on that stage to announce his $800 million empire, he won't be introducing an IPO." I looked at Arthur, my voice echoing clearly through the quiet penthouse. "He'll be introducing his new chairwoman."
The secret to pulling off a masterstroke isn't making your enemy fear you. It's making them feel so entirely victorious that they stop looking over their shoulder. 2 weeks after the gala, I met Xavier in the glass-walled conference room of his lawyer's offices on the 40th floor of the Midtown Financial Tower. The room was sleek, sterile, and cold. Xavier sat at the head of the long oak table in a bespoke navy suit, flanked by 2 senior partners from his legal team. Beside him sat Bianca Sinclair, looking pristine in a cream-colored designer suit, her arms crossed, watching me with a look of triumphant condescension. I walked into the room wearing a muted gray dress, carrying a simple leather handbag.
I kept my shoulders slightly rounded. I kept my eyes soft, downcast, and troubled. I gave them the exact image of a broken, abandoned woman who knew she had been outmatched. Xavier didn't even stand up when I walked in. He leaned back in his leather chair, a smug, relaxed smile playing on his lips. "I'm glad you came to your senses, Chloe," Xavier said, his voice dripping with smooth superiority. "I was worried you'd waste money on high-priced attorneys who would just sell you false hope." I sat down in the leather chair across from him, resting my hands nervously in my lap. "I don't want a long fight, Xavier," I said, my voice quiet, slightly breathless, holding back a rehearsed tremble. I just want this to be over." Bianca let out a soft, amused hum, leaning toward Xavier. "See, darling, I told you she was sensible. A girl like her knows when she's out of her depth." Xavier's lead attorney slid a heavy stack of legal documents across the polished table. "These are the final dissolution agreements, Mrs. Lawson," the attorney said crisply. "As agreed, you will receive a $500,000 cash settlement, title to the suburban home in New Jersey, and a 2-year monthly stipend. In return, you sign a complete waiver relinquishing all personal claims, spousal rights, and future equity interests in Xavier's 20% personal holdings of Lawson Dynamics." I picked up a pen from the table, my hand shaking just enough for Xavier to notice. He watched me with a look of pure, unchecked pride. He truly believed he had intimidated me into total surrender. "And Lawson Dynamics?" I asked, looking up at Xavier with wide, uncertain eyes. "My name won't be tied to the company at all anymore?" "Not a trace, Chloe," Xavier said, leaning forward on his elbows, pointing a sharp finger at me. "The moment your signature hits that line, you are completely disconnected from my empire. When I ring the bell on the New York Stock Exchange next week, you'll just be a spectator watching from television like everyone else." "I see," I murmured softly. I flipped to the signature page. What Xavier's high-priced lawyers failed to realize, because they were so focused on stripping me of spousal claims to his personal equity, was Clause 14B on page 18. The clause explicitly stated that this agreement settled personal domestic assets between Chloe Crawford and Xavier Lawson without altering, affecting, or overriding the independent corporate rights of institutional shareholders or third-party holding entities. They thought they were stripping me of everything. In reality, they were legally locking Xavier into a corner where he could never claim my holding firm, Sovereign Crest Capital, was a marital asset. I brought the pen down to the paper. With a slow, deliberate movement, I signed my name across the line, Chloe Crawford. The moment the ink dried, Xavier let out an audible sigh of relief. He reached out, snatched the signed document off the table, and handed it directly to his attorney. "Get this filed with the court immediately," Xavier ordered, a victorious grin spreading across his face. "The personal liability is cleared. Send the final launch party invitations to Sovereign Crest Capital for Mr. Sterling's signature." Bianca stood up, smoothing down her skirt, looking down at me with a look of pure pity. "Well, Chloe," Bianca said, holding out a delicate hand that I didn't take, "I suppose this is goodbye. You can keep the apartment until the end of the month, but Xavier and I will be moving his things into my family's penthouse this weekend." I stood up slowly, picking up my handbag. I adjusted my posture, straightening my spine, though I kept my facial expressions soft and submissive. "Thank you, Bianca," I said quietly. "I hope you get everything you deserve from this partnership." Xavier stood up, adjusting his tie, not even bothering to look me in the eye as he guided Bianca toward the door. "Don't forget to take your personal items out of the office storage, Chloe," Xavier called out over his shoulder, his tone completely dismissive. "I'll be sure to clear my desk, Xavier," I said softly to his retreating back. I walked out of the law firm and stepped into the private elevator. The moment the polished silver doors closed, trapping me in the quiet, mirror-lined cabin, the soft, hesitant expression vanished from my face. My posture straightened completely, my chin tilted up, my eyes hardened into cold, razor-sharp steel. I pulled my phone from my bag and dialed Arthur Vance. "It's done," I said flatly. "He just sent the divorce filing to the court. He has officially waived all legal grounds to challenge my personal assets." "Magnificent," Arthur replied on the line, a quiet laugh echoing in his voice. "And Mr. Lawson's legal team just delivered the final launch party invitations to my office." "Where is the launch event being held?" I asked. "The Grand Ballroom at the St. Regis. Over 400 top-tier investors, financial reporters, and Wall Street analysts have confirmed attendance. He has arranged for a live national business broadcast for his official speech." "Perfect," I whispered as the elevator descended toward the ground floor. "Inform the event producers that Sovereign Crest Capital will be arriving precisely 10 minutes before his keynote address." "And how should I list you on the VIP security clearance, Miss Crawford?" Arthur asked softly. I looked at my reflection in the elevator glass, a woman who was no longer standing in anyone's shadow. "List me as the majority owner," I said. "It's time to go claim my company."
The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a sea of black ties, glittering designer gowns, and flashing camera bulbs. 400 of Wall Street's most powerful figures, venture capitalists, and national news anchors packed the room. Massive digital screens displayed the sleek logo of Lawson Dynamics alongside the ticker symbols slated to launch on the stock exchange tomorrow morning. At the center of the room, standing on a raised stage under blinding spotlights, was Xavier. He looked sharp in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his arm wrapped firmly around Bianca Sinclair, who looked striking in a ruby-red satin gown. To the room, they looked like the undisputed power couple of the tech world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Xavier's voice boomed through the microphone, echoing off the high, gilded ceilings. "Tonight, we don't just celebrate a company, we celebrate a vision. 5 years ago, I started Lawson Dynamics with nothing more than an idea and relentless determination." The crowd applauded warmly. Bianca beamed beside him, waving smoothly to her family sitting in the front row. "Many people thought I couldn't build an $800 million empire," Xavier continued, his tone dripping with supreme arrogance. "Some thought I needed an anchor to keep me grounded, but as of 3 days ago, I officially cleared every piece of dead weight from my personal and professional life." A few subtle chuckles rippled through the front rows from investors who knew about the divorce. "And tonight," Xavier said, raising his crystal glass, "we welcome our primary institutional backer, Sovereign Crest Capital, to sign the final IPO consolidation papers, right here on this stage. For 5 years, the elusive Mr. Sterling has supported my leadership from afar. Tonight, his legal proxy steps onto this stage to hand me total operational control." The heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. Every single camera turned toward the entrance. Walking down the center aisle was Arthur Vance, impeccably dressed, flanked by 4 senior corporate attorneys carrying sleek leather folders. And walking right beside Arthur was me. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. I was wearing an exquisite, floor-length midnight blue velvet dress that caught every angle of the light with quiet majesty. My hair was styled in flawless, defined curls resting over my shoulders, and around my neck hung a classic diamond necklace. I held my head high, my posture regal, my eyes fixed straight ahead on the stage. Xavier's smile froze instantly. The crystal glass in his hand trembled slightly. Bianca's eyes went wide with pure, unadulterated shock. She took a sharp step forward, pointing a manicured finger down the aisle. "What is she doing here?" Bianca hissed, her voice catching on the open microphone. "Security, who let my fiancé's ex-wife into a private event?" Two heavy security guards stepped into the aisle to block my path, but Arthur Vance instantly held up a gold-embossed leather folder. "Touch her, and Sovereign Crest Capital cancels this event and revokes your security clearance within 10 seconds. The security guards froze, stepping back immediately. I stepped onto the raised stage, my dress trailing softly behind me. I stopped right beside the podium, looking directly into Xavier's frozen, stunned face. "Chloe," Xavier stammered, his voice cracking slightly as sweat began to glisten on his forehead. "What kind of embarrassing stunt is this? Did you come here to beg for more money? You signed the settlement. You have no right to be on this stage." "I am not here for your settlement, Xavier," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but carried by the stage microphone, it rang clearly through every speaker in the ballroom and over the live national business broadcast. "Get her off the stage," Bianca yelled, stepping toward me, her face flushed with rage. "You're a nobody. You're a discarded housewife." Arthur Vance stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press and distinguished board members," announced Arthur, his voice steady as iron. "For 5 years, Sovereign Crest Capital has held an 80% controlling stake in Lawson Dynamics under the direction of our primary principal, known publicly as Mr. Sterling." Xavier rushed over to Arthur, grabbing the edge of the podium. "Arthur, what is going on? Where is Mr. Sterling? Sign the IPO papers so we can start the broadcast." Arthur turned his head, looking at Xavier with cold, professional pity. "Mr. Lawson, there is no Mr. Sterling," Arthur said clearly. Xavier blinked, looking completely lost. "What?" Arthur extended his hand toward me. "Sovereign Crest Capital was created, funded, and operated exclusively by Miss Chloe Crawford. She is, and has always been, the sole 80% owner of Lawson Dynamics." The room exploded into utter chaos. Flashbulbs went off like a lightning storm. Journalists stood up from their tables, shouting questions. Camera crews zoomed in on Xavier's face as the air left his chest. "That's a lie," Xavier shouted, lunging toward Arthur, his eyes wide, his voice breaking in panic. "She didn't have a dime. She was living off my salary. She doesn't know how to code. She doesn't know how to run a business." "Every line of the original Lawson architecture was written on my personal laptop, Xavier. Every emergency wire transfer that saved you from bankruptcy came from my grandfather's trust. You didn't build an empire. You were simply a glorified presenter running a company I built." "No, no, no," Xavier rasped, his hands shaking violently as he looked down at the legal documents Arthur laid on the table. "3 days ago, you had me sign a divorce agreement waiving my rights to your 20% personal share," I continued, holding up a copy of the contract for the media gallery to see. "You thought you were tricking me into poverty, but in doing so, you legally severed your personal estate from my holding firm." I looked over at Bianca, who was staring at Xavier in absolute horror, realizing in an instant that the man she thought was an $800 million tycoon was actually an employee. "And as majority owner holding 80% voting control," I said, turning back to the microphone, "I'm exercising my contractual right under Section 9 of the corporate charter." I looked directly into the live broadcast camera. "Effective immediately, Xavier Lawson is removed from his position as Chief Executive Officer of Lawson Dynamics for gross managerial misconduct and unauthorized restructuring." "You can't fire me," Xavier roared, his eyes wide, his voice breaking in panic. "It has my name on the building." "Then we'll change the name on the building on Monday morning," I replied softly. Arthur Vance signaled to the security detail at the side of the stage. 4 uniformed guards walked up the steps, stepping directly between me and Xavier. "Mr. Lawson," the lead guard said firmly, "you are no longer authorized to be on company property. Please hand over your executive badge and step off the stage." Xavier looked at the guards, then at the 400 shocked investors recording his downfall on their phones, and finally at Bianca. "Bianca!" Xavier gasped, reaching for her hand. Bianca pulled her hand away as if his touch were poison. She looked at his ruined expression, then looked at me, standing at the podium in my velvet dress. Without saying a single word, Bianca turned on her heel and walked off the stage, leaving Xavier completely alone. The guards escorted Xavier down the aisle, the crowd parting to watch the disgraced former CEO be led into the street. I stepped up to the center podium, resting my hands on the dark wood, looking out at the room of stunned investors and flashing cameras. I took a slow, steady breath. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, a soft, powerful smile spreading across my lips. "My name is Chloe Crawford, and as the new chairwoman of this empire, let's discuss the future." 6 months after the night at the St. Regis, the morning sun rose bright and golden over the city skyline. The towering glass building that used to carry Xavier's name had been completely transformed. The heavy, dark signs were gone, replaced by a sleek, luminous gold emblem at the top of the tower: Crawford Global Technologies. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass window of the corner executive suite on the top floor. I wore a tailored ivory power suit, holding a warm cup of coffee, watching the city wake up below. A soft knock echoed on the heavy mahogany door. "Come in, Arthur," I said gently, without turning around. Arthur Vance walked inside, carrying a thin leather folder under his arm. He looked around the bright, energized office and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Chairwoman Crawford," Arthur said, placing the folder on my desk. "The official Q2 financial report just came in. Stock value is up 65% since the rebranding. The developers you promoted to lead the core coding division have delivered our new platform 2 weeks ahead of schedule." "And the stock offering?" I asked, turning to face him. "Oversubscribed by 300%. Wall Street isn't just buying our software, Chloe. They're buying your leadership." I walked over to my desk, picking up the leather folder and opening it. "Any word on Xavier?" I asked softly. Arthur let out a quiet sigh. His legal team tried to fight the non-compete clause, but without capital or institutional backing, he had to settle out of court. He lost his penthouse last month to cover his unpaid legal bills. The last I heard, he was taking a mid-level consulting job in Chicago, under a strict probationary period. "And Bianca?" "Her father pulled her off the board of Sinclair Media the week after the scandal," her dad said with a dry, knowing grin. "She's currently living at her family's estate in Europe, completely scrubbed from their corporate public relations campaign." I closed the folder, setting it down on the dark marble surface. There was no surge of petty thrill in my chest, no bitter joy at their downfall, just a quiet, profound sense of freedom. Xavier and Bianca had let arrogance and greed blind them to the reality of who actually kept the lights on. In the end, they hadn't been destroyed by me, they had simply been crushed by the weight of their own illusions. Arthur looked at me for a long moment, nodding with deep respect. "Your grandfather would be immensely proud of you," he said softly. "You didn't just protect his legacy, you turned it into something entirely your own." "Thank you, Arthur." I offered him a warm, genuine smile, "for believing in me when I was still hiding in the background." "You were never hiding, Chairwoman," Arthur replied, bowing his head respectfully as he walked toward the door. He stepped out of the office, closing the mahogany door softly behind him. I walked back over to the window, looking out over the endless stretch of the city. 5 years ago, I thought my purpose was to stand behind a man and help him shine.
I thought love meant making myself small so someone else could feel big. I adjusted the lapels of my suit jacket, taking a deep, steady breath. I was no longer the quiet wife sitting in the dark corner of a ballroom. I was no longer the ghost behind the screen. I was the master of my own fate, and my empire was just getting started.